Okay. Hi, hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Parallel Session 4 of the 7th International Language and Language Teaching Conference in this Zoom meeting. My name is Jessica as moderator. I am a 5th semester student of the English Language Education Study Program. I will be in charge of this parallel session. Before we start, let me read the rules. 1. Each presentation will last for 15 minutes. 2. 3 presentations will be delivered in a row. 3. We will have Q&A session after the presentations have finished. But you can directly ask questions in the chat room after each presentation has finished by mentioning name, _affiliation, _ to whom the questions will be addressed, and your question. 4. Other rules can be found in the program book. Okay, that's all about the rules. Now we will start today's parallel session 4. There are 3 presentations that will be delivered by Mr. Baskara Tewardaya, Mr. Yohanes Rasul Subakti, and Mr. Antonius Herugianto. Also, Ms. Idea Paramasiti Rahadianti and Mr. Faruk Buwafia. All right, without further ado, let's start with the first presentation entitled Human Rights and Tolerance as Depicted in Indonesian National Media 2016 until 2017, not only a case of translation and history. It will be delivered by Mr. Baskara Tewardaya, Mr. Yohanes Rasul Subakti, and Mr. Antonius Herugianto from Sanata Dharma University. Okay, you have 15 minutes to do the presentation. Time is yours.
Thank you. Let me share my screen first. Right. Okay. So, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Okay. Okay. Right. Okay, I will begin from the beginning. Yeah. Okay. So, let me. Okay. So, the title of this research paper is Human Rights and Tolerance as depicted in Indonesian national media 2016 up to 2017. Not only a case of translation and history. Okay, here I am as a corresponding author. I would like to first of all to thank LLTC, of course, Sanaka Dharma, and also Kusudema. Okay, Mobas, Pak Subakti. Thanks for all the input so that this research maybe conducted. At the same time, I would also like to thank LPPM Sanata Dharma for granting this research. So as the title says, human rights and tolerance as depicted in Indonesian national media, not only a case of translation and history, it has got nothing to do with the present hot issue taking place in France. Yeah, it has got nothing to do with that. Okay, this research is, as mentioned in the title, it's dealing with language and language teaching. Okay, in general and in translation and history within the framework of text as it is published in media. Right. Okay. Background. Why the setting, the political setting is critical to the 2019 general election in the country. Okay, so the data is indeed the data are indeed taken from 2017 and 18. Okay, and the data are those articles published in BBC London. Okay, and it was conducted by my team, yeah, BBC team from Sanata Dharma University. Okay, we used to to send a report, reporting on the cultural, social, political aspect. We see, right? So why 2019 is important? Because that was the general election, for the second term of President Jokowi, and the data is I have got some. The data have got something to do with the preparation for that, I think. Anyway, so the aim of this research is to depict the latest implementation of human rights and tolerance in Indonesia, and particularly in those online media which have been recarried on BBCM. So you see, in those articles or those reports published on BBC were based on reports or article, which had been published in media, especially online media in Indonesia. Okay, and to be particular, or particularly, these articles were carried on many different mass organizations in Indonesia. Okay, and looking to those data, okay, it comes up with the two topics: tolerance and human rights. Now, making use of those ingenious wisdom of Cartesianism, in this case, Taposeliro, and brain text approaches, the step taken consists of translating the primary data with the issues of human rights and tolerance, and then change it, or rather translate it into English, and after that send it to the BBC. Secondly, the ones published and carried on the BBC, okay, are selected, analyzing them by making use of the so-called brains text approach, the very latest and contemporary approach in literary world. Okay. Now, finding out that it is rather impossible to neglect the aspect of history in doing so, in carrying out this research, there are two questions to answer in the study. Number one, how may human rights and tolerance be depicted in 2016 as seen in national Indonesian media? Number two, how was the description of human rights and tolerance be implemented in the similar issues in 2017? As I mentioned earlier, 2016 and 17 are the critical years, important issues in political sphere in Indonesia, because they were the end years of the first term of President Jokowi. But once again, this research has got nothing to do with political, but it is more on language and language change. In this case, translation, history, and its context. Great. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, there are two approaches. The first one, brain text. Then I need to clarify what I mean by the so-called brain text approach. Okay, as we know, brain text argue that literature is unique expression of ethic and morality within a certain historical period, and that literature is not just an art of language, but an art of text. That should be highlighted. So, in ethical literary criticism, the critic would read, interpret, and analyze, from, of course, from ethical perspective. Okay, the first point. Yeah, from ethical perspective. Number two, in light of ethical literary criticism, the so-called moral enlightenment and education are literature's primary function. Okay, let me repeat. In light of ethical literary criticism, moral enlightenment, this really remind me of Nizhen Zhao with the article published in Arcadia. Also, it also reminds me of Horatius, with his famous words. dulce et utile. Okay, in Jogja we have the same expression, yeah, that those proposed by Horatius is similar to the one promoted by Cartesianism theory. The term is, yeah, similar, but I would say the Jogjanese expression, memper ning to do. Right, so that's the brain text. So we are highlighting how important it is moral enlightenment education. Okay, when we are dealing with the text. Okay, in this study is the data. Okay, the aesthetic appreciation in the study, okay, is merely second to it. Right. So combining with the so-called giving and encouraging promoted in Cartesianism, and in this case, apostolero, the data analysis is carried out producing the findings. Next, looking into the data, the findings are not much different from those published by the World Report in 2018 on Indonesian events in 2017. Among the positive and encouraging report carried on the BBC monitoring, okay, can be said as follows, right? Okay, I need to mention maybe that I used to be very busy dealing with the BBC report from here to Indonesia and send it to BBC. Yeah, that was from 2003 up to 2019. Right, now, elaborating the meaning of the two terms, namely human rights and tolerance, is in fact the important beginning step. Okay, while research writing theory would explain the design and technical things applied. Now, according to World Report, the cases on human rights and tolerance may be put into a list. Okay, number one, the case for the right to a healthy environment. Okay, next, freedom of religion, freedom of expression and association, humans, girls, children rights, disability rights, sexual orientation and gender identity, military reform and impunity, extrajudicial killings, key international actors. Such a list may indeed be applied to not only to Indonesia, but to any country at all in the world. There is, however, the so-called proportional representation. So I borrow it from political system term, yeah, the so-called proportional representation. So indeed, those 7 cases, okay, took place, and they have taken place all upon the world, in any country since the beginning of life, not only in Indonesia. But I would like to highlight the so-called proportional representation. Okay, the so-called proportional representation. Okay, of course, it reminds us of the political system. Okay, that the political party will be represented by the representative. Okay, so we need to take consideration into the proportional representation before dealing with the 7 issues taking place in any country, including in Indonesia. Now, not only is the setting, but it is also dealing with the numbers of population of the country. That's another consideration. Okay, if such cases, okay, taking place in big country like Indonesia would not be the same if if it happens in small countries. Okay, I do not need to mention it. There are so many small countries in the world. Okay, even in European countries, there are so many small countries there. Okay, the numbers of population, okay, will affect, will influence, okay, the nature of those cases. So once again, when talking about the human rights and tolerance as depicted in Indonesian national media, of course, it is not only a case of translation and history, we may point out that all those cases would be best approached by making use of brain text theory, right? Okay, because the approach underlining that literature, okay, uh, okay, being the imitation of reality, such as those of this research data, is unique expression of ethic and morality within a certain historical period, and that it is not just an art of language, okay, but rather an art of text. In other words, ethical literary criticism reads, interprets, and analyzes text from an ethical perspective. So, in light of ethical literary criticism, moral enlightenment and education are literature's primary function. Okay, here we need to distinguish it from the meaning of literature. Okay, in the study, we are trying to deal with the function of text. Okay, and okay, I also need to mention that the so-called aesthetic appreciation, okay, merely second to it. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Heru, for the presentation. I believe that all of us got so many new insights from Mr. Heru. Thank you so much for the presentation, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, now let's move to the second presentation. The second presentation entitled Ideational Metafunction Analysis and in Reopening Economy Policies of ASEAN Countries. It will be delivered by Ms. Idea Paramastiti Rahadianti from Sanata Dharma University. Ms. Paramastiti, you have 15 minutes to do the presentation. Time is yours.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity, Jessica. So I think that nowadays we still facing and we still getting some of the massive impacts of novel coronavirus, uh, or usually called as the COVID-19 cases that was firstly found in the Wuhan, China, right? So I think that not only about the health concern, or not only about the health aspects that affected from this this kinds of new virus, right? So there is another impact. So actually it is the economic impact. So to what I said, to limit the kindness of the transmissions of that virus, so the government try or implement the kindness of the enforcement of lockdown, right? So this kindness of enforcement actually will give the big impact for the economic situations for all the countries, regardlessly Indonesia, right? So, okay. And then after the government implement the lockdown, so of course it will give a kindness of the impact for the economic system. So it called as the lockdown, right? So the implementations of lockdown has affected several aspects, as I mentioned before. So one of the economic outbreaks itself is called as recessions. So what is the recession? So I think that most of you have been so familiar with this kindness of term. So recessions is a period of declining economic performance across an entire economy that lasts for several months. So the recessions are visible. We can see about the impact of the recessions for the industrial productions, and then for the rates of employment, and then for the real income, and for the wholesale retail trade. So of course, this kinds of this kinds of impact of the recessions is one of the short of the economic crisis that becomes a global major ongoing problem. So International Monetary Funds, or IMF, is an international organization that consisting over 196 countries that working to foster global monetary cooperations. And another jobs of the IMF is to also to promote high employment and sustainable economic growth. And then another one, it also to reduce poverty around the world, while periodically depending on World Bank for its researches. So International Monetary Funds also cooperated with the World Bank to maintain the balance of the economic situations around the world, right? So actually, from the International Monetary Fund, so you can also update it about the situations of the economic system around the world from its website, right? So actually, IMF has recorded about the economic conditions of the economic decline that happened over maybe around 200 countries around the world as the impacts of the pandemic in the policy tracker part through its website in www.imf.org, right? And then my studies that entitles of the ideational metafunctions analysis in the reopening policies, in the reopening economic policies in Asian countries. So actually try to analyze about the reopening economic policy in Asian countries based on the findings, based on my findings from IMF website. So actually, several countries try to recover, try to fix their kindness of the degradations of economic systems after that pandemic. So in this case, so I would like to not about the comparings about one country to another's, but I would like to know about what kinds of the strategies, what kinds of the target that each country would like to enforce about to reopen the economic system. So the analysis will include the ASEAN countries. So ASEAN countries consist of Indonesia, and then Singapore, Cambodia, Thailand, Myanmar, and then Laos, People Democratic Republic, and then Vietnam, Philippines, and Brunei Darussalam, right? So reopening economic policies are actually divided into two main basic types. So the first one, we have the fiscal policy, and then the second one, we have monetary policies. So as I mentioned before, that my focus is to identify the strategies of each ASEAN countries to overcome the economic outbreaks through their fiscal or monetary policies using ideational metafunctions approach. And then, what is the ideational metafunction? So ideational metafunctions is actually about the parts of systemic functional grammar. So ideational metafunctions are the meanings about how we represent experience in language. So back to systemic functional grammar, so it's actually another kind of system of ideational metafunctions is also interpersonal metafunctions, and textual metafunctions. So the aims of ideational metafunctions, or the focus of ideational metafunctions, is actually to analyze the language. So the language itself becomes the tool to show experience and the ways how we act upon the language. So according to the Halliday, Halliday acknowledge six processes of additional metafunctions. So the first one, we have material process, and then the second one, we have mental process, relational process, verbal process, behavioral process, and existential process. But those six processes, I will not include all of those for my analysis, but I only focus on two kinds of process, which are material process and verbal process, that become the most prominent in my findings. Okay, the first one, we go to the material process. So material process is actually about the processes of doing, or about the actions that usually concrete and tangible actions. So they express the notions that the entity does something or undertakes some actions, which may be done to some other entities. So the analysis of material processes includes some of the participants. So those are actor, goal, and recipient. Okay, sorry. Okay. Actors is actually the agent, or the one that performing the actions. So actually, actors is manifested by the subject of the sentence. And then the second one, we have goal. So goal is about the object, that which is affected by the action. And then the third one, we have recipient. So recipients is a kindness of the targets of the actor, or the receiver of goods or service. And then the second process that I would like to focus is verbal process. So verbal process are the processes that encoded the experience of bringing the inner world outside by the speaking, such as told and said. Verbal processes include all modes of expressing and indicating, even if they need not to be verbal, such as showing. So in a simple way, actually verbal processes actually usually deal with a kind of how we utter, how we speak, right? So therefore, the participants of the verbal process includes sayer. So sayer is the addresser. And then the second one is the receiver. So the one that got the message from the sayers about, or the addressing, or the entity or targeted by the saying. And then the third one is about the entity that we call as the verbiage. So verbiage, or the entity, is the content, what is said or indicated. Okay, so to analyze and to obtain the data, I step several steps. So the first one, I go to the International Monetary Fund website, and then I go to the policy tracker part. And then after that, I select. So even though in the policy tracker part, it provides around 196 countries, but I only selected around 10 countries in Asian countries. Okay, so after I selected the ASEAN countries, ASEAN I mean, so I jumped to the fiscal and monetary policy. So from each parts of the policy, for example, from the fiscal policy, I focus on the several sentences that contains of the material process. So material process is actually about how the government or the central bank try to try to deal with the economic situations. So then in the material process, it includes actor and then process, goal, recipients, and then the second steps, I also go to the verbal processes. So in the verbal processes, I also selected some of the sentences that contains of how the government try to utter, try to announce, try to deliver about their idea to the citizens about reacting the economic degradations. So the analysis of the verbal process will include stayer, process, receivers, and verbiage. And then those process I also applied to monetary policies, and then I repeat that to find the material process, to scrutinize the material process, and then I repeat that for the verbal process analysis. And then, so actually, as I mentioned before, that my focus is to analyze about the fiscal and monetary policies. So those two policies actually is really, really concerned to the economic field. So I'm going to I'm going to give you the explanations or the definitions of the fiscal policy. So fiscal policy is actually the use of the government revenue collections that includes the taxes or tax cuts, and also expenditure or the spendings of the government to influence the country's economy. And then the use of government revenues and expenditure to influence macroeconomic. And then after that, the government changes in the levels of taxations and government spendings influence the level of economic activity. So in the fiscal policy deals with the tax and then government spendings that is often administered by the government department. So actually in the fiscal policy, so the government in this case give the whole role for the economic situations of a certain country. So because in this case, in the fiscal field, so the main target is actually about the macroeconomic variables that actually directly concern to the citizens, right? Okay, and then another one, we have monetary policy. So monetary policy is actually still related about how to deal with the economic situations, but the monetary policy itself does not concern to the government. So monetary policy deals with the money supply and then interest rates, and it's often administered by country's central bank. Right, so it aims to control and to reduce inflations or the interest rate to ensure price stability and general trust of the value and stability of the nation's currency. So in the monetary policy, it's totally different from the fiscal policy because the organizations or the institutions that give the whole rule for monetary policy is from central bank. For examples, like in Indonesia, so the company or the institutions, the legal institutions that concern to the monetary policies is Bank Indonesia and Otoritas Jasa Keuangan. So it means that the government will not give the interventions in this case. Okay, so from my findings and discussions, so in the ideational metafunctions from the from the IMF website. So as I mentioned before, that I only focus in two processes. So the first one is material process and verbal processes. So in this case, and from my findings, the material process is still being dominated in this case rather than verbal processes, because what I said, strategy policies means that the government will want to be more focused on the action rather than only only announce or only says or only plan about something. And then, okay, from my findings of the material process and the fiscal policy. So this is the this is the examples how we analyze the material process. So for examples like this, the government launched fiscal package for vulnerable individuals and groups. So in this case, so I divided into several parts. So the government, as I mentioned before, so the government become the agents of the how to decide the fiscal policy. So government became the actor, and then these are from the verbs of launch. So it indicates that it becomes the material process because it deals with the action, right? And then the goals of the governments to launch what? To launch the fiscal package. So fiscal package become the object that the government would like to launch. And then after that, so we have recipient. Recipient is the target, I mean. So the target of the implementations of the fiscal package is actually will be delivered to vulnerable individuals and groups. Okay, so actually, I would like to summarize from all of the findings that I've found. So actually, in the fiscal policy, so as I mentioned before, so in the fiscal policies, the organizations or the institutions that that only can give the interventions of this case is only the government, so that the governments still become the actors of the fiscal policy. And then after that, the second, other process or other verbs that indicates that it becomes the material process. So I found introduce, and then allocated, and then pass, supported, and approve. So those verbs is actually indicates that those are the enforcements of the government to recover and to restore the economic situations that have been so declined because of the pandemic situations. And then the third one, so I also found some of the recipients, some of the targets that actually the government would like to focus. So the first one, since the COVID-19 is about the disease, so of course the government will give main focus to the healthcare, and then the second one to the household, and then the third one for the unemployment, because of the rates of payoff is really high since we deal with the recessions case. And then for the last one, we have tourism and agriculture sectors. So those recipients become the main targets of government to stimulate the economic outbreaks in the pandemic situation. Okay, and then the second one.
I'm sorry, Miss Paramasiti.
Yes.
I have to stop you because the time is up.
Okay, thank you.
I apologize.
Okay, thank you, Jessica.
Okay, thank you so much, Miss Paramasiti. That was actually an engaging presentation. Thank you so much. Okay, before we move to the third presentation, let me remind you that if you have any questions for the speakers, you can type the question in the chat room. Okay, now we go to the last presentation. The last presentation, entitled Conventionalizing the Unconventional, a linguistic thematization of the Algerian curriculum of literature. The presentation will be delivered by Mr. Farouk Bouafia from Skikda University, Algeria. Okay, Mr. Farouk, you have 15 minutes to do the presentation. Time is yours.
Okay, hello everyone.
Hello.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Morning.
So first of all, I would like to make sure that everyone can see the slides.
Yes, we can see it clearly.
Okay, so hello everyone from Leeds, UK. It's still early morning here because time is like around 5 o'clock a.m. My name is Farouk Bouafia. I'm from Algeria. For those who don't know about this country, Algeria is situated in the north of Africa and its main language is Arabic. So before starting my talk, first of all, I would like to express my heartfelt appreciation to Santa Drama University for giving us this opportunity to take part in this academic event, which I consider of high quality. Still, we are challenging this pandemic era that we are living in, but it doesn't prevent us from organizing such kind of events which let the research community meet, discuss, and even share research projects. Special thanks also go to Dr. Frida Julia, who invited me to participate in the LLTC. And I would like to extend my thanks also to all participants who are attending this Zoom meeting. So my communication is in LLTC is entitled by Conventionalizing the Unconventional, a linguistic thematization of the Algerian curriculum of literature. This topic basically tackles the notion of literature, not from the perspective of literary critics, but rather we would like to discuss it from a linguistic lens. I'm not a poet, I'm not a novelist, I'm not neither of them, I'm just a linguist who tries to see, consider, analyze, and interpret the literary text from the perspective of power of the word, as Joseph Conrad said in one of his writings. So to put the idea in the context of the conference theme, which is intended to discuss new and innovative trends and methods for the best teaching and learning of languages in the new era. According to John Flodrow, who considers that the spread of English as a world language has been accompanied by even growing numbers of people studying at university level through the medium of English as a second language, whether in their own country or in English-speaking countries as overseas students. However, traditional approaches used for teaching subjects such as literature are not efficient to meet the varied purposes of teaching and learning process. So students, they don't benefit from the traditional approaches that we are using at universities in teaching literature. And of course, they are looking for new innovative approaches, methods, techniques, and strategies, so they find literature appreciated, and they can build like a literary repertoire which permit them write and create literary works. So this method is no longer helping students to develop their abilities and critical thinking and even criticize literary works. Therefore, Christopher Riggs, in 1984 mentioned that teaching literature now is generally driven by the thirst to make meanings, which is the main essence of teaching literature, of the text that teachers are teaching out of the contextual thematic aspects. Now, to put the issue of the topic in a nutshell, we consider that traditional approaches to teaching literature are, or does see the concept of literature as unconventional. This unconventionality, which looks for only thematic characteristics of the literary work, this washback effect of teaching literature let the teaching of literature in most of universities, not just in Algeria, but even in other universities, they follow a thematic-based teaching method, which they consider only the contextual characteristics of the literary work, be it a novel or any literary discourse. Contextual dimensions of any discourse, they focus on the plot, the events of the literary work, and from these plot and events, they illustrate and or synthesize themes of the literary work. Nice. So in this context, our problematic is that aspects like intrinsic characteristics of any literary work, namely the structure of the text, the diction used by writers, are not considered as important notions in the teaching learning of literature. First of all, because teachers and even students, they look that any literary work is being unconventional, which means that it is based on interpretations of the reader. Here is from a reader response theory. And literature is unconventional, because there is an absence of textual norms that govern the writing of a poem or a novel, for example, because it's based on the writer's inspiration, the writer's expression, and of course, this washback effect pushed teachers to focus only on a thematic-based teaching method rather than the characteristics of the text by itself. So, the research question that we raise here is that, are these intrinsic characteristics of the literary text which are marginalized by teachers a matter of inspiration from authors, or just a sort of linguistic conventionalization which most of the time teachers neglect to focus on in teaching literature? Algerian teachers' failure to go back to the internal structure of text as a case study here in class, there's students to skip actual reading, and this is the effect of teaching literature from a thematic-based perspective. Students only look for just themes of any literary work which is assigned to them to read, summarize them, and come to the class, just present them to the teacher without proving that they went through the text itself, analyze it deeply, and then illustrate themes. So students, they skip actual reading. So for example, as a student, I say, why am I obliged to read the text? So I just go to the internet, get the themes of any literary work which is assigned to me, come to the class, present the themes, and that's all, and prepare myself for the exam. So thus they fail to develop systematic sound aptitudes in reading, analyzing, synthesizing, and generalizing conventions about texts. So this work questions the prevailing negligence of linguistic structures and the stylistic propensities of literary works, which could be generalized within one work of an author or between different works. Within one work of the author, it means in the text itself and between works of the same author, between works of different authors, between works of different authors within the same era, between works of different authors in different eras. So it depends on the purpose why you are analyzing a given text or a corpora of different texts. For example, if we take Joseph Conrad books or novels like Heart of Darkness, we find it that it is full of adjectives. And these adjectives give a description of a Congo River, for example, or the Congo community, as it is mentioned in the novel Heart of Darkness. By the way, this Heart of Darkness is one of the the assigned novels to be studied by students in the curriculum of university in Algeria, for those students who are studying English. And of course, they just focus only on the themes summarized or synthesized from the novel. But how do we make sure that all students pass through the text itself and analyze it and synthesize themes out of the word that is used in the text itself, out of the diction used by Joseph Conrad, out of the style used by Joseph Conrad, out of the structure of the text itself that is used by Joseph Conrad. Nice. So by going through all these aspects in the text, this makes us like synthesize, generalize specific characteristics that govern the works of Joseph Conrad within the same work, which is Heart of Darkness, or between all the works of Joseph Conrad. It depends on the perspective or from which point of view you want to analyze the works of Joseph Conrad. Nice. Let's take, for example, Emily Dickinson, and we analyze its or her works, her poems, which are considered of being pessimistic. Now, how do we consider, or how do we come to a conclusion that works of Emily Dickinson are characterized of being pessimistic? Of course, through the diction that is used by Emily Dickinson, through the rhymes that Emily Dickinson used in her poems, through all the stylistic characteristics of her writings, through the structure of her poems, and so on and so forth. The same thing for Poe works, which are considered as like difficult works in terms of understanding and grasping by students, because Poe himself uses a difficult diction that is even critics find like difficulties to understand. Nice. If we come to read the classic tales of the horror of Edgar Allan Poe, classic tales of the horror, the Raven, tales of mystery and imagination, the different works of Edgar Allan Poe are all characterized. They share a certain convention, they share a certain norm in his writings, which are being considered as difficult in terms of diction use. Nice. So if we go all the writings of these works, we find that there are specific characteristics of the same author that he uses mostly in his work. So here we conclude that there is a sort of convention that governs the work itself. Nice. If we go through different works of different authors who lived in the same era and who lived in the same context and who shared the same like contextual cultural background, we find that they share the same characteristics of their writings. Now, if we try to compare authors from different literary genres, like someone who is writing in sociology, someone who is writing in psychology, someone who is trying to depict a context from a cultural perspective, and so on and so forth, we find that they have specific characteristics of their literary genres. Nice. Now we come to period of a historical depiction of literary works. We find that different movements throughout history, literary movements basically, they share the same characteristics in terms of authors' writings. Now, don't we consider that these are conventions? Don't we consider that literature is no longer a matter of interpretation? Don't we consider that literature is no longer a matter of focus only on meaning rather than and neglecting the text itself? Nice. So here we can move from the unconventionalization to the conventionalization of the unconventional itself. Nice. This idea came out of a discussion between me and one of my professors at university when I was a student in my master degree. And we had like a hot talk between me and him about this context of conventionalization, something which is unconventional, something which is based on interpretation rather than the stable norms we follow in writing a given piece of writing. So we need to call for conventionalizing the teaching of literature, because teaching of literature is something which is systematic, which is structural, which is stylistic before being thematic, which is the result of all of these. So what makes the curriculum systematic, structural, linguistic is just when we follow a kind of a conventional method of teaching literature to reach these objectives. As a conclusion, textualization of any literary text makes it thematized. Thank you very much, and your questions are welcome.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Farooq, for the amazing presentation. The insight that we got from you is very valuable because we can get to know about Algerian curriculum of literature. Thank you so much. Okay, I apologize because we have limited time. We cannot do the question and answer session. But if you need further information, you can directly contact the speakers through email that is written in the program book. Okay. Before we close today's parallel session, could everyone please turn on your camera because we are going to take a photo together. The operator, please. Is everyone ready? Please turn on your camera. Okay. The operator, please.
Okay, let us take photo together. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you everybody.
Okay, that's the end of Parallel Session 4. Thank you so much everyone for joining our 7th International Language and Language